Welcome, everyone, to this year's Painting Pairs Research Initiative. This is our 14th year of convening this collaboration. So we're really excited. We've got great projects coming up. We've had a record number of applicants this year for the program, which just shows you the interest and enthusiasm for this kind of collaborative research. So, so today we've got 5 different pairs. Each of them are going to introduce themselves and then their painting, and then they're going to talk about what they're hoping to achieve in their research. At the end, they'll each speak for about 20 minutes, and at the end, there'll be time for questions. So please do ask questions because it could help focus some of their research questions. Oh, and I also wanted to thank Pippa Balch and Karen Sayers, who are both here, my co-conveners for this project. I want to thank all the owners for their paintings and their enthusiasm about the research. And also the Research Forum, who are very involved in the organization of this project. So I'm going to turn over to Danielle and begin.
All righty. Good morning, everyone, and welcome. We're starting off here. My name is Spencer Guyman. I'm a master's student in the History of Art program here at the Courtauld, and I will be talking about the art historical aspects of our painting in focus today.
And my name is Daniela Riveros, and I'm a second year MA Conservation of Easel Paintings, and I'll be talking about the conservation aspect of the painting.
So, our painting in focus for this project is the Madonna enthroned with St. John the Baptist and St. Mary Magdalene by an unknown Venetian artist, most likely working in the second half, late 14th century. The medium is egg tempera on wood panel. And it is now in the collection of the Barber Institute of Fine Arts in Birmingham. So the painting is a triptych, meaning that it's composed of 3 parts into one ensemble. The central panel depicts the Madonna and Christ child seated on a cushioned throne. Madonna holds a book and supports the Christ child, who sits on her knee. Both figures are clothed in body-light garments and fashioned with decorative halos. Behind them is a tapestry, the pattern of which is a combination of painted brushwork and punch marks into the panel itself. On the left panel, we see 2 figures, St. John the Baptist in the standing position and the Archangel Gabriel kneeling in the top portion. Gabriel's action is mirrored by the figure of the kneeling Virgin Mary on the top portion of the right Annunciation. On the bottom portion of the right panel is St. Mary Magdalene. This complete triptych is a rare survival from the 14th century area of Italy, as most have been subsequently dismantled or lost altogether. Sets of hinges connect the main panel with the side wings, which can be folded inwards to conceal the imagery. The small size and light weight of the triptych suggests that this was an object intended for personal, portable use, and there are some comparative examples still extant. This is just one by a follower of Zucchi in the purely horizontal format. Some portable triptychs from this period are similar in shape and size, as is this one, while others featured elaborately carved wooden frames with gables on the top. Yes. Supporting the likelihood that this was a portable triptych is the survival of painted figures on the backs of the wing panels, as we've illustrated here. While much of the paint surface is lost, 2 figures remain visible. An unidentified holy woman on the reverse of the right wing, which you can see here on our left, and an unidentified man, perhaps a member of the Dominican order, on the reverse of the left, which here is illustrated on the right. And there are traces of inscriptions using red paint, but those, like much of the surface, has been deteriorated over time, so they're currently unable to be read. But the existence of these figures suggests that this triptych was treated as a 3-dimensional object and thus frequently used, considering the extent of the paint loss and the fact that there is imagery on the back of the painted panel. So in terms of imagery of the front itself, the triptych can be viewed in relation to the Italo-Byzantine style and the earlier generation of Tuscan artists. The central panel of our painting exhibits the stylistic influence of Duccio as well as Giotto, whose gravity and weightiness of the figures can be seen in the Barber's Madonna. The iconography of our central panel follows the Byzantine iconography of the Poggiatoria, or She Who Shows the Way, in which the Madonna engages with the Christ child as he sits on her hands or knee. Related to this iconography is that of the Maestà, in which the Madonna and child are enthroned and enjoined by a crowd of angels. The Maestà iconography is oftentimes depicted amongst a larger ensemble of saints or holy figures, as we can see here in examples by Giotto and Zucchi. These iconographic traditions stem from Byzantine icons, which were absorbed into the Italian style in the 13th century, notably following the fall of Constantinople in 1204 and the various trade networks across the Adriatic Sea. So moving to the left wing of our Barber triptych, this features St. John the Baptist, identifiable by his sash and its Latin inscription, shorthanded for Ecce Agnus Dei, which is Latin for Behold the Lamb of God. Indeed, John points towards the central panel, which here would be on the right side of him. This central panel, of course, features the Christ child. This is the standard iconography for John the Baptist, who is oftentimes depicted in a camel hair coat in reference to the life in the wilderness as described by the Gospel of Luke. The damaged inscription in red paint accompanies John in the Barber triptych, which appears to spell out his name. This use of lettering to help the viewer identify the figures appears on all four figures of the wings with varying degrees of loss. And I've included a painting by Lippo Memmi of St. John the Baptist to sort of relate it to the broader iconographic tradition of John the Baptist in the fur garments with the banner, which reads, Behold the Lamb of God. The right wing, on the other hand, features St. Mary Magdalene, who faces the viewer and stands with open hands. She's identifiable by her body-length hair, which attests to the conflation of Mary Magdalene and Mary of Egypt, a 4th century prostitute who became a hermit in the desert with possessions. Medieval accounts, namely the Golden Legend of 1260, popularized the Magdalene as a penitent prostitute and isolated hermit, who would miraculously be carried up to heaven by angels for sustenance during her 30 years in the desert, which is the imagery that you see here on the left on the later painting by Pollaiuolo. In our painting, the Magdalene is depicted steady on the ground, but still with her identifiable body-length hair. Either way, the iconographic emphasis in the Barber panel is that of the hermit lifestyle, or at least the rejection of earthly pleasures in the name of God. Our painting is associated with the Venetian school of the late 14th century on the basis of its Italo-Byzantine style, which emerged throughout the 13th century due to the cultural and artistic links between the Italian peninsula and port cities along the eastern Mediterranean. The punch pattern behind the Madonna's throne in our painting can be perhaps seen as a reference to the Byzantine tapestries, which were frequently traded in Venetian ports during the period. With Venice as an area of focus, we ought to consider our painting within the milieu of the lagoon city's leading Trecento painter, Paolo Veneziano, and his associates. When comparing our painting to known works by Paolo Veneziano, several broad stylistic similarities become apparent. We see the use of the cushioned stone altar with the tapestry design behind it. Notably, our figure of St. John the Baptist bears a strong resemblance to the same figure in Paolo Veneziano's Palma triptych, which is now in Palma. Both figures stand on a patch of green, angled toward the right with a banner in one hand, while the other hand points toward the Christ child in the panel to the right. The use of the red inscriptions above the figure help the viewer identify the saint. That is another noticeable similarity. These similarities perhaps point to the influence of Paolo Veneziano's style in our painting, although any exact similarities or attributions cannot be confidently confirmed at this point. In terms of research questions and next steps, can we establish a connection between our painting and known artists from the late Trecento Venice? Can we further specify the original use of our painting based on the figures of the verso that shudders? And furthermore, what does the punchwork tell us about our painting's origin? Next steps can include reaching out to galleries and academics specializing in early Italian painting, and also exploring the oeuvres of major Trecento Venetian artists, including Paolo Veneziano and his known contemporaries. And at this point, I'll switch over to Daniela for the conservation portion of the project.
All right. So I will now outline the current condition of the panel, what its physical history suggests thus far, and my proposed plan for technical examination and treatment. Upon arrival, the panel was housed in a velvet-lined frame with no backing. This allowed immediate access to the reverse of the object and enabled me to conduct a preliminary condition assessment while evaluating whether it was safe to proceed with on-framing. The central panel exhibited several vertical splits at the upper and lower edges, which upon closer examination appeared stable and not actively propagating. The right-hand panel depicting Mary Magdalene showed a split running down the center, which had been repaired during a previous intervention. By contrast, the left panel presented no immediate structural concerns. Once my initial observations indicated that the panel could be handled safely and that the hinges were not functional, I determined that unframing the painting was necessary. The frame was inappropriate for the object as it was extremely tight-fitting. This left no allowance for the natural dimensional movement of the wood, thereby increasing the risk of further structural damage over time. Before proceeding, however, I decided to take an X-radiograph of the painting to assess whether the screws securing the panel corresponded to any of the existing splits. This step was essential in developing a safe removal strategy, as any overlap between screws and splits would suggest that the framing itself had contributed to the damage. In that scenario, removing the screws could have risked further propagation of the splits. X-radiography is a form of technical imaging in which X-rays are emitted and passed through an object. Similar to medical X-rays, denser materials absorb more radiation and therefore appear lighter in the resulting image, while less dense materials appear darker. In the context of painted objects, materials containing heavy elements such as lead or mercury-based pigments or dense components like screws will appear light. In the context, less dense materials like chalk-based ground layers allow more X-rays to pass through and therefore register as darker areas. A detector captures the transmitted radiation, producing a black and white image that is then digitally recorded. In conservation, X-radiography is particularly valuable as it provides us with information about an object's construction and technique, as well as its structural condition. I will now explain how this technique informed my understanding of the panel's structural integrity. As can be seen here, the screws did not align with any of the splits. This confirmed that they could be safely removed and that the panel could be unframed without introducing additional damage, allowing a more thorough condition assessment. In terms of construction, the panel conforms closely to what is expected of a late 14th century Italian work. Each of the three panels consists of a single wooden board, likely poplar, and each have an integral frame. An integral frame, particularly in early examples, refers to a frame that is carved from the same piece of wood as the panel itself. The selection of wood was largely dictated by availability and cost. In Italy, poplar was the most commonly used species for panel paintings, as its natural growing area spans much of the peninsula. However, its popularity was not solely due to availability. Poplar contains strong adhesion between glues, ground, layers, and paint, and can reduce certain forms of degradation under fluctuating moisture conditions. It is a relatively homogeneous wood with good dimensional stability and can be sourced in large, regular, and mostly defect-free boards. The continued structural stability of this panel is therefore consistent with the known properties of poplar and its widespread historical use. As expected for an object of this age, the surface of the painting bears evidence of multiple previous conservation campaigns. This is particularly evident in the ultraviolet images, which reveal the most recent intervention. Ultraviolet light is used in conservation for its ability to induce fluorescence in certain materials. When UV radiation strikes materials such as dyes or resins, it excites their electrons, which then release energy as visible light, producing a characteristic glow. Varnishes fluoresce differently depending on their composition, and as they age, they undergo chemical changes, including oxidation and polymerization, that result in the formation of fluorophores. These compounds increase the efficiency of UV absorption and re-emission. Natural resin varnishes, such as the one I believe is present on the Madonna enthroned, typically fluoresce a yellow-green color. By contrast, darker or non-fluorescent areas often indicate retouching, most likely associated with the most recent conservation campaign, as these additions generally sit on top of the varnish layer. The UV images also provide insight into historical attitudes towards the object and its treatment over time. One of the questions we posed upon receiving the panel concerned the markedly different treatment of the front and back surfaces, and whether this disparity might reflect in a shift in understanding of the painting as either a two-dimensional image or a three-dimensional object. The reverse of the side panels, which are also painted, exhibits a flame fluorescence, indicating the presence of a varnish layer. However, there is significantly less intervention. The only clear retouching on the back occurs in the split in the Mary Magdalene panel. Visually, the reverse appears more fragmented and less unified than the front, which may reflect historical perceptions that prioritize the image-bearing surface over the object as a whole. With this in mind, another key research question concerns the extent to which original material remains visible. Can distinct conservation campaigns be identified through technical imaging and archival research? And is it possible to propose approximate dates for different interventions? What we have found so far is promising, suggesting that it may be possible to map out areas of what we believe to be original material. In addition to UV imaging, preliminary infrared reflectography has also helped identify potential retouching, particularly in the Virgin's Robe. Infrared reflectography works by capturing infrared radiation that penetrates the upper paint layers, allowing us to visualize features such as underdrawings. Because different materials absorb and reflect infrared radiation differently, carbon-based materials, for example, will appear darker in infrared images. In this case, infrared reflectography has revealed a clear contrast in areas of the Virgin's Robe, likely due to differences in the infrared absorbency of various blue pigments. I will discuss the implications of this in greater detail in the next presentation. But for now, these images provide a solid foundation for addressing questions of originality and intervention. To further assess the degree of fragmentation within the object, I plan to carry out additional technical analysis. In parallel with Spencer's ongoing research, I will investigate materials and techniques to evaluate whether the painting remains consistent with its current attribution in terms of date and place of production. This will involve a range of analytical methods, some already introduced here, and others that will be discussed in more depth in the next presentation. These include microsampling, elemental analysis, and close examination under the microscope. Together, these approaches should also help characterize retouching materials and techniques, potentially allowing us to date certain conservation campaigns. Alongside this analytical work, I will also undertake treatment of the painting. My primary objectives are both aesthetic and structural improvement. Initial steps will include solubility testing to assess the varnish and its relationship to underlying retouching in order to determine whether varnish removal is safe and whether it would improve the overall appearance of the painting. Decisions will also need to be made regarding the extent to which previous retouching should be retained. This will depend largely on how much original material survives and how visually fragmented the painting is as a whole. Any retained retouching will need to be adjusted to reduce its visual prominence. Additionally, the painted reverse of the panels will require careful assessment as the surface is a little bit more vulnerable than the front. I will also think about suggesting a more appropriate framing solution that accommodates the natural movement of the wood and allows the object to be appreciated as a three-dimensional work. Finally, here are some of the references we've used should anyone wish to consult them. And yeah, thank you for listening. Is there any questions?
Yeah, I was wondering, I mean, the concerns that you have, the interests you have seem a little bit different from each other. One is looking at different workshops and trying to identify the work as part of somebody's workshop at the time, and your concern is largely to do with the condition of the painting. And I wonder whether you thought there was an overlap between the two, whether you thought that some of your technical evidence might help to inform looking at it.
Perhaps so. Yeah, that's one of the major questions that we're going to want to look at over the next couple months and address in the next presentation. But one of the areas we're most excited about would be the punch work. That's more of a physical aspect of the painting, but we know that punch works varied from artist to artist, from workshop to workshop, and a lot of times some of them are just unique on their own. It's very difficult to make comparisons.
From our initial examination of the painting, we can tell that a lot of the faces have been repainted, so it has informed Spencer's iconography and comparison with other workshops, because I have told him that he can't go on the faces. However, I am pretty confident that there is still original punch work, and so that's one of the reasons we've been focusing on that for the inspiration.
I guess this actually follows quite well from Aviva's point. I wonder if your questions about the sort of original use of the object could be informed by looking at the condition in terms of possible evidence of physical sort of devotion to the panel in terms of, touching the object if there's more damage in a certain area. And I think perhaps of the work of Joanna Cannon, who I'm happy to send this to you, but she sort of talks about this iconography of the Virgin, sort of the idea of the intercessory power of she holds the Virgin's foot, she sort of points to him, and her foot projects out the front of the base of the panel, which is where you were sort of supposed to direct your devotion to, and often it involves sort of particular damages around that area. And I wonder if maybe looking more closely at the condition of the panel in that sense could inform your understanding of how the object was used.
Yes, absolutely. I think which I'm also happy to share with you the other images, but insofar there's actually a lot of retouching in the feet. You can't really see the feet of the Virgin, but in both of the feet of Mary Magdalene and St. John, they both have, it looks quite degraded, especially under magnification. So yeah, that's absolutely, yeah, thank you. I would love to get the mechanics. Thank you. Yes, Graham.
Yeah, you showed the X-ray image with the panel formed a split that looked to have been joined with a series of three sort of probably metal, but I don't know, armatures. How did they get there?
I am still unsure because I have so there's those, and then there's also butterfly keys on the back. So there seems to have been either two different campaigns of joining back the split panel, or this could have been a single one with the dowels and then the butterflies on the back. But I'm still looking at that. Yes.
I'm interested in the figures on the back. So could you have a hazard a guess of who they might be and their significance?
Yeah, for me, that's one of the most interesting points I'd want to explore, just because from Italian painting from this period, there's a variety of different ways that the backs of these panel triptychs were painted. Some of them had frontal periphery, some of them had nothing. So we're lucky to have some figures on ours. They're not in the best state of preservation, but we can still tell enough, perhaps, about who they might be. Comparing the dress of the kneeling man, we think there's a likelihood that he might be a member of the Dominican order based on the black and white coloring of his costume. But he's kneeling and facing a certain direction, but on the same panel there's nothing next to him. Perhaps that relates to the way the panels would have been folded when the main painting was covered, so they would interact with the figure on the other side, which is the unknown female saint in red. It is interesting that she's holding up her hands like this, which mirrors the way that Mary Magdalene holds hers on the front of the panel, and she is wearing red and she has a red halo, so that there is some sort of holy context to her that's above the Dominican member on the right, because he does not have anything above his head. And there is some inscription that does survive in red paint next to these figures, but that's something that we're going to be looking at over the next couple months to see if we can find any additional traces of inscriptions anywhere.
Great, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Hi everybody, my name is Finn McGrath. I am an MA of the Conservation of Easel Paintings student here at the Courtauld, and I'll be undertaking the conservation treatment and technical analysis of our object.
My name's Esther Hughes. I'm a History of Art MA student here at the Courtauld, and I will be undertaking the art historical research for this project.
So our painting that we're looking at for painting pairs is one of Antonio Zucchi's grisailles that is included in a Robert Adams scheme at Harewood House. I'll just give you a little brief contents of our presentation today. So we'll just introduce the object itself, our research questions about the painting, and then our timeline and next steps, respectively. This is the object itself. This is the painting. It's a grisaille by the Venetian painter Antonio Zucchi. It's datable between 1766 to 1771. It depicts figures in quite classical figurative scheme. And it was produced as a part of Robert Adams' decorative scheme for the dining room at Harewood House, where it was originally set directly into the wall, most likely intended to imitate plaster relief, a technique that Adam employed elsewhere throughout the house. It's worth noting that Robert Adam was a leading British architect at the time, this late 18th century time, and working in a neoclassical style. And his work really profoundly influenced the aesthetics of affluent homes of this era. During the 19th century renovations of Harewood House, however, the original Adams interior of the dining room where this painting was situated was altered, and many wall integrated paintings such as this one were removed and placed into storage. So just to introduce a little bit more about the object in its current condition, I think that the painting reflects the history of architectural integration and subsequent removal. It's most likely painted with oil, and it's executed on unlined open weave linen and stretched on its original four-member wooden strainer, and remains unframed as it was originally intended. While the strainer is structurally stable, it shows evidence of woodworm activity and splintering consistent with front nailing through the picture, which you can vaguely see around here. The canvas itself is brittle and slack, with extensive abrasion, tears, and losses, particularly at the lower corners. And the pale ground layer is generally stable but locally exposed, and the matte grisaille paint is heavily soiled and abraded, especially along the turnover edges. So that's just a very brief introduction to the object, but I'd like to pass over to Esther to introduce it a bit further.
Yeah, so an important step for us to understand the meaning behind this painting was to understand the subject matter, who it's depicting and what they're doing. So Zucchi mostly dealt with mythological themes, and he had quite a standard repertoire of attributes that he would give to his classical figures. So we were able to find this other painting by Zucchi. It's in Harewood House, and it was made roughly within the time period that he was also completing the Harewood House commissions, just slightly later. And this is a painting of Bacchus and Ceres. So Bacchus is the Roman god of wine, and Ceres is the goddess of fertility and agriculture. And, well, first of all, this helped us fairly securely attribute our painting to Zucchi, and it also allowed us to identify these figures in the painting. So yeah, this is Bacchus, who can be identified by his ivy wreath and then the pine cone topped staff, which we see here. And then here is Ceres, identifiable by her wreath of wheat that she wears in her hair. And from the identification of these two figures, we were able to connect this painting to a Latin adage that comes from Terence that goes, "Without Ceres and Bacchus, Venus would freeze." Or in other words, without food and wine, love grows cold. So perhaps given the 18th century context of this painting, a fairly moralizing tone to that. And that helped us recognize this figure in between Bacchus and Ceres as Venus. I'll just show you this. This Rubens painting shows a kind of typical artistic portrayal of this saying, where Bacchus and Ceres are shown to be offering food and wine to Venus. And we'll often have Cupid in attendance. As you can see, here's the Cupid figure just at Venus's feet, and then 4 accompanying putti, who are often shown also with Venus and Cupid. The scene is complemented by an outdoor setting, kind of adding to this sense of abundance and fertility, and classicizing drapery behind the main figural group. There are some fairly typical neoclassical attributes. This vessel just underneath Bacchus's hand is similar to some other vessels that appear in Zucchi's classical paintings. And then this Sphinx, it was a fairly typical Adams attribute. It appears in quite a few of his decorative schemes, so this helps kind of point to the collaboration between the two men. And going on from the subject matter to the context of the painting, by looking at Adams' architectural drawings for the Harewood House scheme and comparing them with the current rooms in Harewood House, we were able to identify the dining room, so this drawing over here, as the site of the painting. So as you can see, the painting would have been a kind of part of an upper wall scheme. So there were also other grisailles by Antonio Zucchi in this room. So this dining room setting fits quite nicely with what we found with the subject matter, these themes of consumption, food and wine. And as you can see, the room now, the upper walls have been covered up by plasterwork, which we think was possibly part of the 1848 remodeling of the decorative scheme by Charles Barry, which was likely when the painting was taken down. And now Finn will introduce our research questions.
Yeah, so now that we're all a little bit, well, at least have a preliminary familiarity with the object, I'll just introduce our lines of inquiry for deeper research. So the first one being attribution and agency. That revolves around the complex relationship that the Adams brothers had with a retinue of artists, which kind of prompts us to question the nature of the attribution of the painting. What can the painting tell us about the agency that Zucchi had over his decorative schemes? And if the painting was potentially a kind of collaborative project, is there any way that we can identify the hands involved in the painting? The second is kind of a necessary question. Why is it a grisaille? Why was this painting executed in grisaille beyond the practical considerations of cost, speed, or anything like that? And how does monochrome painting operate materially and rhetorically within this context, its intended context? The third research question is to do with social and political context of the dining room itself, and how that space functioned as a setting for display and self-fashioning. And what does the decorative scheme communicate about patronage, identity, and power of those who use the space and viewed the object? And then the fourth more problem is one of redisplay. Originally, this object is architecturally defined, yet it's now turned into a very autonomous object, a painting in and of itself. As we know, display, it alters the reading of artworks, inevitably, and conservation mediates interpretation. So we hope to ask how to marry those two together to suggest potential redisplay most sensible for the object at the end of its treatment. Great.
So I'm going to talk to you guys about our first research question, which centers around attribution and agency. So as I said before, we have a fairly secure attribution to Antonio Zucchi, but there are some more complex questions behind this. So Robert and James Adams' architectural office was a huge commercial enterprise. It ran for over 30 years, during which time they employed between 2,000 and 3,000 employees, including 140 craftsmen, and among that were 10 decorative painters. Here are some of the decorative painters, and one that particularly stands out is Angelica Kaufmann, being one of the founders of the Royal Academy, and she also later married Antonio Zucchi, so we know for a fact that they produced some artworks together. Robert Adam, who was in charge, he was kind of in charge of the entire architectural practice and also was in charge of the Harewood scheme, was known to have fairly rigid control over his craftsmen and artists that worked for him. And that was due to his architectural philosophy of a very close synthesis of decorative elements in painting. So with all of this in mind, we have to question how much artistic control Antonio Zucchi had over this composition, and whether there were any other hands at work in the painting. And this is something that we will try to ascertain through a very close comparative visual analysis, looking at sketches and paintings by Antonio Zucchi, other painters that worked for the Adams architectural practice, and also by Adams himself. And conservation analysis and treatment will also be a very important part of this to help us find material evidence that could clarify authorship, process, and collaboration, if any. And now Finn will speak to you about our next question.
Yeah, so why grisaille, as I mentioned, at a practical level, this choice is or may relate to an economical considerations for ease of execution. However, I think these explanations are insufficient in isolation and speculative, frankly. A deeper reading into his artistic choices asks how the grisaille medium operates in relation to the broader decorative scheme, and specifically, what was the material and rhetorical role of monochromatic painting in this architectural context. This line of questioning points to the influence of Charles Louis Clarisseau, a prominent advocate for grisaille painting within French neoclassical and decorative painting, and a mentor to Robert and James Adams during their grand tour, which Zucchi is famously accompanied them on. Viewed through this lens, the grisaille likely reflects more than just the principles of the Adams decorative style. It suggests Zucchi's active engagement with 18th century artistic debates concerning suppression, the relationship between painting and sculpture, and the aesthetic function or deliberate suppression of color in neoclassical visual culture. Within neoclassical visual culture and decorative practice, grisaille suppressed color in favor of contour, modeling, and illusionistic relief, which reinforced ideals of restraint and antiquity. The application of the grisaille style has material consequences, the first being why paint on a canvas and not a wall. The deliberate absence of color, coupled with also the apparent lack of varnish on this painting, strongly suggests that this was an aesthetic choice intended to enhance the picture's sculptural qualities and diminish its painterly nature rather than a purely economical one. And just hand over to Esther to introduce our last research question.
Yep, so when thinking about historical context, considering the patron of this scheme is really important. So Edwin Lascelles was the owner of Harewood House, so he commissioned the decorative scheme and thus the painting. This is Edwin Lascelles, painted by Joshua Reynolds. He was the MP of Yorkshire at the time, and he was also one of the wealthiest men in England due to his family's involvement in the East India Company and the transatlantic slave trade. So I think this is a really important thing to acknowledge when you're thinking about the money that actually paid for this scheme. And also important is the setting of the dining room. So this was a space of display and sociability. Edwin Lascelles would have hosted his high-profile guests here. So we have to see the painting and the scheme that it was part of as kind of agent in this active construction of his public image of taste, refinement, wealth that he wanted to project to his guests. So that leads us to our research question of how does this painting interact with the patron's intention? What does the neoclassical register, the subject matter add to our understanding of Edwin Lascelles' kind of identity construction, and what can it tell us about elite sociability and display? And we have a very rich scholarship that connects politics, neoclassicism, the Grand Tour, and colonialism in the 18th century in England. So that will really help us to think about these questions.
Great. So it's just some next steps for my part in this project. We hope to combine research of art historical knowledge with close material analysis of the painting's materials. Material composition of the artwork is often, well, it is determined by a specific design and painterly process. And this is hopefully expected to reveal its unique characteristic features. When interpreting and evaluating a painting and its analysis, it's crucial to account for all the changes that the work has undergone since its creation, including natural aging, alterations from painting techniques, and conservation interventions, if any. By relating the work's present condition to its original intention, we establish a framework for assessing its material history, its transformation over time, and the extent to which its meaning has been altered or obscured. Thus, the painting that we're looking at by Zucchi serves as this focused case study for examining material choice, compositional function, and artistic effect over or within its historical context. So the proposed technical analysis will begin with non-invasive examination, raking light to assess surface topography and deformation. Magnified examination will characterize brushwork, pigment particle behaviors sometimes, and any retouching, if any. Ultraviolet-induced visible fluorescence can assist in mapping varnish, layers, or any other organic coatings, usually, which the painting does not initially appear to have. Infrared reflectography, where feasible, can reveal underdrawing, which will hopefully be critical in answering questions of design, translation, and artistic agency for this painting. And if Harewood House permits, microsampling to create cross-sections would establish the paint layer sequence, potentially revealing pigment mixtures, the painting process, and identify any other unexpected things within the paint stratigraphy. So further conservation actual treatment steps will include verso and recto clean of the dirt and accretion, so we can see a consolidation of paint flaking around tears and turnover edges, flattening the tacking margins, repairing tears using the thread-by-thread method, most likely strip lining, retouching, considering a matte protective coating, and then constructing and applying a backing board. I think another important thing to mention is that conservation treatment has this great dual function. It conserves the material integrity of a painting, but also reveals the characteristics of the painting's materials through treatments necessary testing stages. So we'll see what comes of that as well.
In terms of the next steps for the art historical research, we have a really great range of sources available to us to help us think about the kind of setting that this painting was operating within. So to help us with our comparative visual analysis, we hope to look at some other Zucchi paintings in Adam's decorative schemes. So here in London we have Harewood House and we have Home House, which I know for a fact have some really great Zucchi paintings there, to get a better understanding of his style and handling and how his paintings operated within these decorative schemes. We have also some great archival resources. The Soane Museum has a huge collection of Adam's architectural office sketches, and including some Zucchi sketches as well, I believe. And we've also managed to track down a sketchbook that Antonio Zucchi made during his time completing the Harewood House Commission, which is in Huntington Art Gallery in California. So looking at these sources can help us think about the collaboration between Zucchi and Adam, and also Zucchi's artistic process. We have some great primary sources as well. We've managed to find a companion, tourist companion to Harewood House from the early 19th century, which can give us a really good understanding of kind of responses to the house from a fairly contemporary viewpoint, and kind of people who might have visited the house, and the artistic dialogues at play at the time. This painting was made around the time of the institution of the Royal Academy, and we know that Antonio Zucchi was an associate member of the Royal Academy. So looking at some of these kind of lectures and discourses that were happening in the Royal Academy around this time could help us understand Zucchi's interaction with this relationship between painting, sculpture, colour that's at play in his choice of the grisaille. We'll look at some great scholarship that we have access to, and I think maybe a more important step for us will be a site visit to Harewood House to meet kind of the people who are involved in Harewood House, and to really understand the space that the painting was made for, to look at other Zucchi works that are currently in place in Harewood House, and to hopefully also see the other grisailles that were part of the dining room decorative scheme. So just to sum that all up, we would like to really underline the significance of Antonio Zucchi as one of the most important decorative painters working for the most important architectural practice in the late 18th century in the neoclassical style. This painting raises some really interesting questions around authorship, professional networks, the status of the painting within a decorative scheme, and the intentions of the patron. And I think this is where collaboration between a conservator and an art historian can offer some really new and interesting insights. So thank you for listening, and we'll take some questions now as well.
Two kind of questions. One, what's a grisaille? Never heard this word. Also, how big is it? I'm looking at your colour swatch.
Yeah.
So it's a grisaille is what architectural, like purpose-built.
It's essentially a painting in grey, and that can be kind of range from very clear imitation sculpture to more just kind of monochromatic painting.
It can be very, very detailed and like painterly or quite sketch-like as well.
Gris.
Yes,
Yes,
it's
exactly.
exactly. And as to its size, it's pretty big.
It's quite
It's like, I think I've got the dimensions in. It's like really long. My whole arm span. And it's quite heavy, unfortunately. Anyway, just hope that helps.
And it like went up on the.
upper
Most
wall,
likely,
we think,
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, you mentioned the other paintings. Obviously, we saw them in the scheme that you'd found. I was wondering whether, obviously, you said you were going to look at them, but how would your conservation work connect the other objects, the other paintings that are similar paintings? Do you have a thought about how that would impact the future display of possibly all of the objects together?
Yeah, I guess in terms of setting up a methodology for, that's a new word we've been learning this week. In terms of setting up a methodology for the future treatments of the other works that are constructed, hopefully in the same way, that would be, I guess that I hope that would be a good thing. So then these other 4 or 5 potentially works that have the same issues, have the same material history, the same provenance. So I guess I hope that the treatment that I do and the analysis that I do is a stepping off point for somebody else or another project to then conserve them all and have them all maybe back in the same space, or I don't know, something. Yeah.
I think those are also questions that will arise as we kind of have a conversation with those who work at Harewood House. And yeah, hopefully we can try and think about them more as a scheme. But again, as we spoke about with the kind of complexity of free display when the actual architectural home of these paintings doesn't exist anymore, it's definitely something we'll be thinking about. Yes.
I wanted to ask about the colour scheme, or lack of colour scheme, because lots of Adam interiors are incredibly vibrant in terms of the painted finishes on the walls, and I wondered if it looked on the image you showed like that room was actually not that colourful in general, but I wondered if you thought about also any analysis that there might be, or knowledge that there might be of the original paint finishes in the house or in the room that might inform us kind of thinking about colour and its use or lack of in these paintings.
Do you mean like the paint on the wall, like the wall?
Yeah, just the wall finishes, yeah.
Yeah, 100%. I guess I hope the on-site visit will elucidate that for us. And we've gone, we've seen some of the online images from the Soane Museum, but there are a number of architectural drawings as well, which are, I believe they've got colour on them, at least vaguely. Yeah. So,
Yeah, they can be really like wild combinations of like green and
yeah,
pink.
100%.
So it might be deliberate to.
Yeah, and it's also interesting to think, about the rhythm of the scheme throughout the house, because I know that some of those rooms in the house are much more colourful.
Yeah.
So the kind of experience as you walk through the house, how you experience that changing space. And again, how, these are very clearly quite somber in tone and creating quite an architectural or kind of archaeological experience with the faux relief. So how, yeah, that will definitely be something we can. Yes.
Oh, yeah, sorry, go for it.
Hi, that was great, thanks. So a lot of people working on Adam in the run-up to his anniversary, the National Trust included. One of my observations of paintings set into his architectural interiors it is around the types of supports that end up being used. So I would just encourage you to think about coming and looking at our archives in Savoy Hill House as well, and connecting with some of our architectural curators and others. We have a team looking at Adam specifically, but I do think there might be reference to material evidence and past treatments across our, 4 to 6 equivalent properties and and various interiors. But yeah, the point about the structure of some of these pictures, and you've got a lovely rectangular one, easy to stretch, standard shape and size and everything, but there's quite a lot of circles going on in various schemes, and they often have, by my observation, quite eccentric kind of seams going across the centre, and so that was one thing that sprung to mind. And I like the point about that kind of future display, because Harewood, I'm sure, are thinking about, what their presentation options are, and as indeed, we do. So whenever you clean a scheme, a ceiling or whatever, so it'd be interesting to get some feedback about how they're approaching that, because we have kind of orphaned images like this in our collection too. So I guess not so many questions, but some observations, and reach out.
Definitely, let's chat.
Thank you so much. It's great.
Excuse me, you mentioned agency in connection with the subject of this grisaille. I wonder to what extent you consider the patron's role in this, and whether you have access to family papers which might document his role in it.
Yeah, so we haven't looked so much into the actual Lascelles archive. We've mostly been focusing so far on the Adams archive. That's definitely something that is a next step in our research. I think we can only go so far as to assume a direct kind of patron's influence over this particular painting, because it was part of a larger scheme that was quite likely designed by Adams. But I think thinking about Adams' direct communication with Lascelles would be a really important thing to think about that. And we have some, in other Adams houses, we have some really nice examples of archives of letters between Adams and the patron. I think Nostell Priory has some. So it would be really great if we could find something like that for Harewood House.
For sure.
It's something we'll definitely look into.
Just following up from that, it's obviously very typical for the client to be writing to the architect, and often not the client solo, but the client duo if there's a spouse involved too. Do you know how much female involvement potentially there was through, was Edwin's wife alive at that moment? Who was the commissioner? Who was the lead client for this overall scheme? Did they work together?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, because definitely in other schemes you see, I think there's even examples of direct Zucchi communication with wives of clients. I don't know if that's the case at Harewood House.
Yeah, we've done a little scouring online and haven't been able to find anything preliminary yet, but
that would definitely
be a very good point.
A consideration.
Yeah,
it's a really interesting point.
Can I just ask, I don't know how relevant his relationship with Campman was, and whether you'd be at all interested in influence it, whether in terms of construction of this painting, whether that position of women in art at this time, any record of an influence from her in this?
Yeah, it's something we've spoken about. Actually.
Yeah, definitely. But I think we're running out of time, so I might say yes. That's a good point, and we'll move on. Thank you very much. Thanks for listening.
Thank you. So our piece is a 19th century crucifixion. It is painted with oil on tin. It depicts Christ on the cross in the center of the composition, flanked by the Virgin Mary on the right and St. John the Evangelist on the left. The figures are set against a dark background framed by red draped curtains, which open onto the scene and create a sense of staged revelation. It evokes an altar or a shrine-like setting. Our painting belongs to the broader category of the Retablo painting. The term derives from the Latin retrato tabula, which means behind the altar. It originally referred to the decorative or didactic images placed behind church altars in the Middle Ages. Over time, the term expanded to include painted altar panels, frontal pieces, and eventually small devotional images intended for private use. Retablos encompass two main types, santos and ex-votos. Santos in the Spanish America emerged initially from the clergy's need for icons to aid the dissemination of Christianity and to cultivate religious fervor. They were typically hung on walls surrounding ornate church altars, often in apses and gilded transepts. They depicted Christ, the Virgin, and the saints. As private devotion became more widespread, wealthy and pious families began commissioning their own images. Marian figures such as Nuestra Señora del Refugio and the Mater Dolorosa were particularly popular. Early patrons were primarily Spanish colonists or criollos who sought familiar European religious imagery. During the 1570s, Flemish prints circulated widely, providing models for the Mexican painters. Before the 1800s, santos were generally painted on canvas or wood, with copper sheets occasionally used by wealthier patrons in early 18th century. By the 1820s, in wealthier states, artists began painting with tin, which is a lightweight, durable, and relatively rust-proof material, and it is the material our painting is done in. Tin allowed the paint to adhere well and reduce the cost of production, enabling mestizo households, which were on the list here, to acquire santos, and sheets were imported from Britain and the United States until production began in Mexico later on. Typical sizes progressed from 9 square inches to 1838, and then so on. Color palettes were limited. The primer coats were usually dark browns or red. Paints were done in dark blues, yellows, occasional dark olivey greens, and reds as well. Over time, the varnish layers darkened many of these pieces and giving them a somber appearance like the one in our painting. Production peaked between the 1850s and the 1900s, declining in the earlier 20th century due to the industrial reproduction of religious images. Stylistically, santos remained very conservative. They emphasized easily recognizable images and devotional clarity over any sort of artistic experimentation. Ex-votos, by contrast, arose spontaneously from individual devotion, often in fulfillment of a vow or in gratitude of divine intervention. They typically depict the miraculous event alongside a sacred image and include the supplicant's identity and provide a narrative explanation. Our painting aligns closely with the Santo tradition. It represents a single sacred figure, which is the crucified Christ, without any sort of narrative detail, donor identification, or reference to a specific miraculous event. Its small scale and tin support suggest a portable image intended for private devotion rather than a votive offering at a shrine. Although the inscription identifies a miracle, which I will get back to in a second, or reference any specific act of divine intervention related to it. So it is associated to a miracle working original, but in itself, it's best understood as a santo. Scholarship in colonial Mexican devotional paintings has focused primarily on copper santos, which are often commissioned by elite patrons. Religious orders, such as the Jesuits, played a key role in transmitting European devotional models during this time. They brought paintings and prints from Europe, many on copper sheets, and they introduced both the medium and the iconographic conventions to New Spain. These works influenced local painters and helped establish a consistent visual language for the Christ, the Virgin, and the saints. A major source of compositional influence came from Flemish prints, which circulated widely in New Spain after the Spanish crown granted the planting press of Antwerp a monopoly on distribution to Spain and its territories. Mexican painters frequently adopted them, and so their composition poses, gestures, often echo European originals. By contrast, thin santos like our Christ remain less represented in scholarship. Their affordability, lightweight, portable support, and accessibility allowed these devotional images to circulate beyond churches and elite homes, which is probably why they're not very researched. Despite these material differences, research on copper santos remains highly relevant for my bit of the project, especially. It provides a framework for understanding iconography, stylistic conventions, and to a certain degree, devotional function, while tin materials properties introduce specific considerations such as increased wear, dents, and holes, which is probably King's problem. Scholarship also highlights the stylistic conservatism of santos, which rarely shows any signs of artistic innovation, as I said. Even when produced for private homes, they maintain the visual vocabulary established by European prints and Jesuit imported paintings, ensuring some sort of classes in all of New Spain. The inscription of her painting identifies it as the Black Christ of Esquipulas. It links her figure directly to the town and its devotional site. Esquipulas is located in the fertile Olapa High Valley in Guatemala. It is a key area with multiple rivers that historically served as trade and pilgrimage routes, both before and after the Spanish conquest. The settlement was established prior to Spanish arrival, and the colonial authorities later implemented a stable encomienda system in the territory. The indigenous inhabitants had long-standing ritual practices in this area, including copal burning, cave worship, and geography, which is earth eating. This may have influenced the choice of Esquipulas as a Christian pilgrimage site for the Spanish. Parish priests likely adapted these pre-Hispanic traditions into Christian rituals, which was a very well-established practice already. A parish church was built in the 1850s, and by 1595, a life-size wooden crucifix was commissioned from Quiro Cataño, who was a Portuguese sculptor living in Antigua, the capital of Guatemala, which may have influenced, the figure's athletic, is athletic and it has a sense of lightweightness, which reflects the 16th century crucifix styles. And as the cult grew, a larger church was commissioned and completed in the 1700s, becoming the largest basilica in Central America with full bell towers. The cult to the Cristo expanded rapidly in the 18th century and the earlier 19th century, drawing pilgrims from across Central and South America. The location's sacred association with caves, springs, and kaolin deposits combined as well with the Cristo's powers to strengthen the cult's appeal. And although the crest is known today for its black color, it was originally carved white. Its darkening occurred over time due to the accumulation of candle wax and handling by the pilgrims. The blackness itself was not its primary reason for being so admired and sought after. Rather, it signified the sacredness of the site and the transformative experience of pilgrimage itself. Christ's body in our painting is rendered, therefore, with a striking dark tone, with an elongated and rigid anatomy that emphasizes the strong verticality of the cross. His head inclines towards his chest, and facial features are only faintly legible due to the darkness of his face. He wears a garment highlighted with gold accent, which contrasts the somber coloration of his body. The blood coming out of his wounds is schematic and sparse. It doesn't feel like it flows naturally. It comes out of his knees, the left side of his chest, and his right shoulder. The Virgin Mary and St. John stand upright beside the cross. Their poses are restrained and their expressions are subdued. Their figures are relatively flat, defined by simplified contours and broad areas of color. While there are not many painted depictions of this crucifixion, the few ones we could find tend to follow the same compositional formula of the Christ and the two saints, except all of these include a third or fourth figure following the sculpted scene that is placed at the sanctuary. The image of the Virgin itself was a puzzle at first for us as well. As you can see, she has a small object placed on her chest, while at first we thought it could be a stretch in a way to think that she was being stabbed and that the object was maybe some sort of cross. We then realized that this is the Virgin of Sorrows. She is often depicted with 1 or 7 swords piercing her heart to symbolize the immense emotional and spiritual pain that she had to endure throughout her life, particularly during the Passion of Christ. It highlights her spiritual martyrdom and the idea that even if she wasn't physically harmed, the her emotional suffering was as sharp as a literal weapon. Flemish artists in the late 15th century were actually the ones who popularized the Mater Dolorosa, and as we know, Flemish prints widely circulated Spain and its territories. Their style was often restrained and contemplative, focusing on her weeping face or folded hands rather than the physical stab of a weapon. Spain, however, later became the epicenter for this imagery, especially during the 17th century. And Spanish artists took the concept of stabbing a little too literal, and they stabbed polychrome sculptures and they pierced them with metal daggers or swords. This style was heavily exported to the Spanish colonies, such as Mexico and the Philippines, to inspire devotion amongst the new converts. And upon reading the inscription, I immediately assumed that the painting was Guatemalan, and although the subject of the painting is in fact the Christ of Esquipulas, which belongs to a Guatemalan cult, our study so far of the material and style suggests that it was likely produced in Mexico, which was the first thesis. Tin painting became widespread in Mexican states such as Jalisco, Guanajuato, and San Luis de Potosí from the earlier 19th century. And in contrast, Guatemalan devotional art favored wooden sculptures such as the life-size Christ of Esquipulas himself, which remains the central focus of the cult to this day.
Okay, so yeah, sure. As for the condition of the painting, there were some aesthetic and structural issues that were immediately apparent upon its arrival into the conservation department. Overall, there were a few minimal deformations in the support along the edges, which is not uncommon for paintings on metal due to things like handling, framing, and hanging and such. The surface also had a small amount of particulate dirt and dust. However, the most prominent aspect of its condition is the severe delamination, which is occurring at the interface between the metal support and the paint layer. This has caused areas of paint loss, which are most densely concentrated in the four corners of the composition and in the virgin stress. These micrographs were taken under one of the Courtauld stereo microscopes under high magnification, and they illustrate just the incredibly small scale at which this flaking is taking place. Much of this can be explained with an understanding of the painting's support, which is tin plate, as Juliana mentioned. Tin plate is a composite material made by dipping a steel plate that's been rolled into a sheet into liquid tin at high temperatures, which gives it a thin and shiny coating. These layers are evident in micrographs from areas of exposed metal on the painting, such as this one, which is taken from Christ's halo. And the light silvery metal is the intact area of tin, which sits on top of a darker brown steel core of the sheet, which has been exposed. The paint on the surface initially acts like a protective layer, but blistering and flaking occurs when moisture penetrates the paint and then breaches any gaps or breaks in the thin tin coating. And this comes into contact with the steel beneath. The water then reacts with the iron ions present in the steel to form reddish-brown corrosion products like iron oxides. The volume of these metal degradation products can then push upward against the paint layer and burst through. This phenomenon is not unique to the crucifixion scene that we're working on, and it's been observed in other works on tin plate, such as the self-portrait by Portuguese artist Francisco José Rezende, which is from approximately the same time period in the 19th century, where you can see areas of concentrated flaking in the sitter's eyes and jacket. Often, paintings on tin plate have problems with recursion because of the inherent vice of the support. Because the paint surface is so fragile, the painting must be handled incredibly carefully, and it has had to remain horizontal at this time to prevent a multitude of paint pieces from falling off, which are either vulnerable or already detached. This has presented Juliana and I with a unique challenge, as in order to do certain types of imaging and analysis for technical examination, it is best for the painting to be upright and ideally unframed as well. This has meant that essentially before examination has really even properly begun, I've had to begin the treatment with an emergency consolidation campaign to try and get the artwork to a place where it can be removed from its frame and handled so that we are able to finish documentation and further treatment can take place. For this, I needed to stabilize the areas that were identified as being the most fragile, which I have illustrated here in blue. So there's a lot. Metal is one of the less common painting supports, I'd say, that we see compared to things like canvas and wood. And so for this task, I needed a consolidant that was not aqueous or thermoplastic, as introducing water to the painting could further corrosion of the steel plate. And because metal is a very good conductor of heat, the application of the thermoplastic adhesive might be difficult to control and potentially cause more of the tin coating to lift off of the steel. I found promising results using Harewood B72 at a 15% concentration. And it is a synthetic resin that is often used as a varnish in paintings conservation, but one that also has been commonly utilized as a consolidant of paintings on metal. Multiple studies, including one completed by Isabel Horowitz in 1996, have shown that B72 adheres effectively to both metal and paint and also continues to have good long-term stability. So despite the limited options for examination until consolidation has been completed, we were able to begin some preliminary investigation thanks to the generosity of the Paper Conservation Department here at the Courtauld and with the help of Kate Edmondson by using the VSC 8000. This is a piece of multispectral imaging equipment that can be operated while an object is laying flat. The VSC has a window that can capture an area of 5 by 7 inches, and while this could only be used in the central part of the painting, as the frame would catch the equipment if we put it near the edges, this still proved incredibly useful in allowing us to draw some initial conclusions about the materials and techniques of this painting. So one of the benefits of painting on metal is that the surface is smooth and uniform. However, without proper preparation, this also makes for poor adhesion of the paint layers. Using a strong raking light, we can see evidence of long continuous scratches across the picture plane that do not correspond to any distinct brushstrokes or details in the figures or background. Likely, these are from one of the preliminary steps taken to prepare the metal plate for painting, which was to roughen the surface of the tin plate to give it more tooth. Nico Brewers and Isabel Horowitz in their research on paintings on copper have speculated that this was achieved using materials like sandstone, ashes, or pumice. These subtle markings are also easily visible under magnification, as seen on the right, which shows some of the intact tin coating. It has also been suggested that a coating of garlic juice or drying oil would then be applied afterward to add an additional bit of tackiness to the surface. By looking closely at the edges of paint flakes that are lifting under high magnification, it appears that a white ground was then applied as a priming layer to give the artist a luminous surface upon which bright pigments could look really strong. So using a light colored ground was a common practice, so something rather unusual that we've seen has been a bright red layer that is visible beneath the white ground on some of the paint flakes in places where this color is not part of the visible composition. Even more confusing, this appears in areas scattered across the painting, including under the green stage, the pedestal, and the background by the drapery and the cross. It is possible that this is another layer of degradation where reaction has taken place at the interface of the metal and the paint layer. On copper, for example, sometimes the metal ions in the support will react with the binding media to form a green layer. So perhaps something like this has taken place. However, it's incredibly bright, and as Juliana mentioned, there were times when red was used as a preparatory layer. So I think it's more likely that this is a distinct paint layer, which was then painted over at another time when the white priming was added. It would be worthwhile to take some samples from these areas to try and confirm this by seeing whether the layer contains discernible pigment particles, which may provide more information. The infrared camera on the VSC was also used to check for an underdrawing. Any artist's materials that contain carbon will appear very dark in infrared light, allowing us to some insight into the artist's planning process. we were able to see some very faint dark lines around the drapery in both figures, as well as beneath the horizontal beam of the cross and along the edges of the pedestal, the latter two which are shown here, indicating that the artist did use an underdrawing to lay out the composition of the crucifixion. Once the painting is able to remain upright, we are looking to use the Courtauld Osiris infrared camera to capture the entire painting and better observe these areas of underdrawing, as well as any others that may have been inaccessible due to their proximity to the edges. The paint that was used is likely oil, but as of yet has been untested. The artist used very fine brushes, building up thin layers to create a convincing sense of depth in the folds and the delicate appearance of bright light with small, very carefully placed highlights. These tiny details also reinforce our theory that this was an object used for personal devotion, as the viewer needs to be close to the painting in order to appreciate all of these aspects. One passage that has proved puzzling for us has been Christ's loincloth. The base looks to be a light-colored white or off-white paint, with brighter details on top of this to show a swirling floral pattern. This is most easily seen actually in the infrared light image taken with the VSC. In normal light, though, this has been almost completely obscured by a brownish layer on the surface. It is not completely uniform and also has a shimmering reddish look underneath the microscope. Like the case with the red layer beneath the priming, it is difficult to discern whether this is a form of degradation from the support that has come through to the surface, which similarly can be seen with the small dark splotches that are kind of at the base of the pedestal, or if it's an original part of the painting, like something like a decorative glaze, which has degraded past recognition of what color it might have once been. Its restriction to just the loincloth suggests this may be the case, but further investigation using sampling will help determine this by illustrating where in the layer structure that this is presenting. So we were also able to use ultraviolet light to inspect any surface coatings. Different materials on the top of paintings sometimes fluoresce under UV light, and the color of that fluorescence can help indicate some information about what those materials are comprised of. The surface of the painting shows a subtle, warm, yellow-colored fluorescence, indicating the likely presence of an aged natural resin varnish. And additionally, the small whitish-blue specks show the dusting of fine particulate dirt. So based on these observations, I have made a conservation treatment proposal. My primary goal is to finish consolidation and get the painting to a point where it can be handled and remain safely upright. After that, we can proceed through the rest of our technical investigation, including key stage imaging in normal, raking, ultraviolet, and infrared light. XRF will be useful in identifying elements present in the pigments, which may help in clarifying a date range for this picture, as it is supposed to be 19th century, but this is awaiting further confirmation. Pigments such as blues, yellows, and whites have frequently moved in and out of palettes throughout history, so focusing in on those areas will be important. Taking samples and analyzing cross-sections will also aid in answering questions related to the layer structure of this artwork and whether some of the puzzling phenomena that we are seeing can be attributed to degradation or to artist materials. After this, any particulate surface dirt and dust will be removed, and the painting will then be tested to see if the aged varnish can also be cleaned off. At this point, a conversation will need to be had with our stakeholder to approach whether to retouch, and if so, how much, as we wanted to keep in mind that this is a devotional piece and we are looking to honor its history and function as such. So together we have used the information that we've gathered thus far to inform a series of preliminary research questions.
I think we can both agree that we have a lot of doubts. But for the time being, I think we want to know, is there a closer established tradition of paintings of the Black Christ from this time or location? We kind of want to understand, like, how was, like, the image from the sculpture kind of translated into painting, and why are there such few exemplars to compare it to, and just kind of try and position it within a wider tradition. We also want to know if price doesn't follow the compositional formula that the rest of the paintings that we found have. We also want to know what's going on with the loincloth. We would like to know why is it painted that way. Because its shape, it's a bit awkward. It has a very strange shape that we cannot figure out yet. We also would like to know how do people interact with this object, how it would have been handled by its owner, and how it's been passed down through like different hands as well throughout time. We would like to know where these holes that it has all over its surface come from. What can they tell us about how the painting was used? For this, we considered maybe contacting some sort of Guatemalan priest or someone who is closer to the faith in this region, because I feel like we're a bit disconnected from the area where it is from and like how it would have been handled a little bit. We also would like to understand a bit better how did the Black Christ motif travel from Guatemala to Mexico or all over South America and Central America, since some of the examples of the paintings we found are also probably done in Peru, which is a bit far. So just kind of want to understand that bit of the context.
Yeah, and additionally, there's a lot of questions, like I mentioned, about what is kind of degradation and what's artist materials, and I think kind of discerning like where one ends and one begins, and then what the artist materials are composed of, can also help kind of support those art historical research questions by kind of guiding us towards different time periods, different materials, and how those materials were also like operating in those areas in Central and South America. So yeah. Thank you so much for listening. Oh yeah, does anyone have any questions?
Yes.
Hi.
This is really interesting. I was interested in what you were saying about learning about the way that the artists applied materials and the use of maybe an oil layer on top of the tin. And also your question about how whether the degradation is related to the artist's material. I wonder if you might explore what kind of environmental conditions the paintings experienced, because what you suggested about the metallic ions and potentially the oil connection, if that's in a particular environmental condition, that can sometimes cause those kind of interactions which can disrupt a paint layer. I'm thinking perhaps like a carboxylate or something.
Yeah. I think that just the way that this painting was likely displayed was either just, we know it came in its frame, that's what the stakeholder said, that how it arrived, but traditionally they were just hung by nailing a hole through the top likely and then tying it up. And so there wasn't really any protective barriers that were shielding the paint layer or the support from things like changes in humidity or temperature. And I think that those kind of environmental fluctuations that this was likely exposed to during its lifetime as an object would have likely helped promote some of those chemical reactions that were happening, either on the surface of the painting or with the moisture kind of getting access to the steel support and then causing those degradation products. Did that answer your question? Yeah. Okay.
I have a question about who was making these paintings and where the materials come from. Do you think it's traditional oil paint? Were they sourced locally or are they imported materials? I mean, whether your analysis might suggest where the materials came from and who made these things.
The artists were probably just local artists. A lot of them was either self-taught or just small artists like working informally throughout New Spain. There are several very well-known and established artists, but they were working on very big commissions, none of which resemble ours, unfortunately. These were very big, and then for like big churches and very wealthy private patrons. We're thinking our piece was probably owned by either a mestizo or even a lower member of a lower casta, which is like the social stratification of New Spain. So it was probably done by unknown artist that we will find out who it is. The tin plates, as I mentioned, they were brought from the States and from England at first, because this is where the sheets of tin were first started to be used. And then eventually in the late 18th century, early 19th, that's when Mexico started producing its own tin, but it's probably unlikely that they used it for this purpose straight away, so it was probably imported from either Britain or America.
I'm not sure. I think I'll have to look in more at identifying the elements that are present and trying to see like when those become commercially available, either in places where they might have been imported to, local artisans there, or maybe if there are records concerning when those became commercially available for those artists, if they were being produced kind of in that area as well. And I think it's interesting to note things like, I don't know, like Red Lakes, for example, like cochineal was produced locally in Mexico and also in the regions of the Andes as well. And so I think that will also be kind of an interesting path to go down, looking at those types of, the types of paints that were used. Yes.
Since this is the second small private devotional object we've heard about today, I wonder if you've had any interesting comparative discussions with the other group who had the Italian piece, and if anything has come from those discussions.
Yeah, but we will.
That's right. Yes, as well.
I just want to say thank you very much for a wonderful presentation, and I think this is the most perfect example of how the two of you working together can try and understand what it is you're looking at and what you might have had and how to then go about representing this piece, because without each of your work, neither of you nor us can understand anything. And I think it's really beautifully integrated. So I want to say thank you for that.
Thank you so much. And also thank you for your help and expertise as well.
I had a question, kind of tying in together a couple of your research questions, looking at the dissemination of this motif and how the image of this particular Christ ended up in Mexico, and then also looking at the composition of this particular piece where you've got the Virgin Mary on the other side, and overlapping that with what you mentioned earlier about the influence of much earlier of Flemish prints and circulation of imagery, and wondering whether you looked at the use of prints made, or the way that images might have been recorded down and then taken out, so something like a print that is much easier to travel, and also might explain why you have a flip of an image. That had come up at all?
Yes, I've spent a very long time trying to find a very specific print or something that I can tie it more closely to, like our composition. It's a bit hard. There's not a lot of record on the types of stuff that circulated around New Spain. Unfortunately, not a lot of the exemplars survive, but still on the look. Stay tuned, I guess.
I was wondering if you've thought a bit about preventive conservation for after treatment, and if the considerable flaking that's been going on, I know that impacted your use of parallel B72, but if there's been other considerations of what you might do to prevent further flaking.
Yeah, this is a really good question, and I think that a lot of it will have to come down to how the painting is going to be reframed and represented. The frame as it is right now is not original, and it's very, very small. So I think that there will have to be further conversations that are had about maybe ways that we could add barriers to protect this object from changes in environmental fluctuations and temperature and humidity and such. Yeah.
As
really interested in the question of the piercings and where the holes came from. And I wonder if you have any plans to kind of research that strand in terms of like philosophy and ethics, and there are other traditions where, you know, there are interventions by devotional kind of audiences, and yeah, if you have any comments about that, I'd be curious.
Well, this is mostly, I guess, speculation from experience as well, I guess, seeing all the festivities and carnivals that go alongside these type of paintings in New Spain and New Spain. So we're thinking it has to do something with the sort of like decorations and the clothes that were worn during the, what do you call this? Festivals and carnivals and the processions around small towns in South America. I'm guessing it's connected to that sort of decoration, and as well to perhaps the ex-votos retablos as well. They would have probably been placed next to each other, so maybe there's some sort of connection between how they were placed next to each other, and that's why they were pierced or something, but it's speculation so far.
And would you keep the piercing?
I think so.
I think
kinda
so,
like them.
yeah. I think it's very unique. Like, we haven't seen any sort of visual comparisons to it, and I think because of that, it provides some interesting context and questions about the lifetime of this object. So I think we would like to keep them. Yeah. Oh, sorry. I think
we've run out of time.
I know. I think we've run out of time. I'm so sorry.
Good morning. My name is Paige Strobel, and I'm the MA Conservation of Easel Painting student.
Hi, my name is Toby Mackenday. I'm a master's student in the History of Art department. We just wanted to start by saying thank you to Maureen, Pippa, and Karen, the leads of the Painting Pairs program, for this incredible opportunity. We're also grateful to Nina Strachey for granting us access to this incredibly beautiful painting, and to the experts, Stefan Ricker, Lisa Shekaday, and Michelle Day, for so generously sharing the research and insights, and to the Parochial Church Council of Stowey Church for their generosity. And finally, thank you to the Research Forum for hosting this event.
So in this presentation, we will introduce Henry Strachey by examining his life, artistic practices, and his artistic influences. We will then discuss the condition of the artwork, proposed treatment plans, and the key research questions guiding our study. So this is our object we've been studying, and it's an allegorical painting titled Night Pursuing Day by Henry Strachey. It is dated to 1918 and currently resides in a private collection. This work has been referred to by several titles, such as Day Dismissing Night, Day Defeating Night, Night Vanishing Day, and Night Pursuing Day. The inscription on the back, which we will discuss later in this presentation, most closely aligns with the concept of Night Pursuing Day. And so we will be referring to the artwork as such throughout the course of this presentation. And we hope that our continued research will further clarify and inform this interpretation.
So Henry Strachey was born in 1863 and is the youngest son of Sir Edward Strachey of Sutton Court. He was an accomplished portrait and landscape painter, art critic, art historian, and musician of the late 19th and early 20th century. He died in 1940. Strachey was well connected in the British art scene at the time. He attended the Slade School of Art in London from 1879 to 1880. He was the older cousin of Lytton Strachey and Duncan Grant, both members of the Bloomsbury Group, who had become major catalysts in British modernism. Henry's brother, John St. Lo Strachey, was the owner and editor of The Spectator. St. Lo Strachey employed Lytton Strachey as a writer for the magazine, and both Henry Strachey and Duncan Grant provided art criticism. Strachey exhibited widely, including at the Royal Society of Artists in Birmingham, the Walker Art Gallery, Liverpool, the Grosvenor Gallery, the London Salon, the New English Art Club, the New Gallery, and the Royal Academy of Arts. He was part of the Hanging Committee at Clifton Arts Club and Bath Society, providing the Bloomsbury Group with some of their first exhibition spaces.
So Strachey's artworks mainly include murals, and he carried out several public commissions in London, but his only known surviving murals include the Brockwell Hall murals in Lambeth, seen in the upper left corner, capturing the Somerset landscape he so admired, and the murals in the Church of St. Nicholas and the Blessed Virgin Mary in Somerset. The church murals were executed in 3 different stages in 1900, 1909, and 1915. The murals combine an Italian fresco-like style with the appearance of the local landscape. The nave east wall, depicting the Last Judgment, visible in the upper right corner, was the first mural in the church, created in 1900, followed by St. Nicholas and the Virgin Mary, produced in 1909 for the chancel east wall, seen in the bottom left corner. Each were painted on canvas and what is most likely oil, although other mediums were also popular at this time, such as spirit fresco, water glass method, and calcimine tempera. These works were then adhered directly to the wall's surface. The scene from 1900 has an organic surface containing wax, which is absent from the 1909 work. The north and south walls were executed in 1915, pictured in the bottom right corner, portraying a New Testament scene with notable stylistic, technical, and material changes observed. The 1915 mural was painted onto canvas, adhered to plasterboard panels, and then attached to the wall. The paint was thinly applied over a thick white gypsum-based ground, producing a matte, luminous, and fresco-like effect. Stylistically, the mural created in 1900 is heavily populated with dynamic figures and muted, opaque colors, compared to the 1915 mural, which is sparingly populated with static figures, has lighter tones and brighter colors. From this, we can potentially infer that Strachey's mural technique was still developing and evolving. For one of these 3 mural stages, did he apply any of these similar styles, techniques, and materials to Night Pursuing Day? Did he use a more traditional approach or something completely new and experimental?
So Strachey's work had a number of influences. At Slade, he was under the professorship of Alphonse Legros, a French-British artist. The Slade School of Art strongly advocated for decorative painting, drawing inspiration from the French artists who pioneered the movement in the late 19th and early 20th century. This marked a major shift, particularly in murals, from monumental endeavors to a more decorative sensibility, leading to more scenes of intimate life and pastoral landscapes. Strachey's influences also include the Italian painter and architect Raphael. He wrote a book titled Raphael, published in 1900, detailing the master painter's work and life. Strachey praises the painter, saying in the introduction, and I quote, "Raphael, on the contrary, walks in the world, and like the sun, shines everywhere, all humanity feeling his influence. To him, the earth was a place filled with beautiful things, which had only to be brought together and to be touched by the talisman of his art, to fall into harmony with each other and the rest of humanity." End quote. Another major influence was Duncan Grant of the Bloomsbury Group, with whom he would spend substantial time. We'll be looking closer at this connection. Upon initial observation of Night Pursuing Day, Strachey seems to merge his 2 major influences, decorative painting and Italian Renaissance fresco. Looking closely at the painting, the 2 figures are contrasting. The figure on the left, representing Night, is modeled by Frances Strachey, sister of Henry Strachey, and is surrounded by dark clouds and stars that emphasize the nocturnal theme. A luminous moon forms a silvery halo around this figure. In contrast, the figure on the right embodies day as a winged angelic form crowned in gold and depicted in the nude. This figure is modeled by a local boy from Stowey, who appears in other works by the artist, including his murals at Brockwell Park. Compared to his other known works, Night Pursuing Day is an unusual subject and style for Strachey. It is perhaps one of his only known allegorical works. On the back of the canvas is a line taken from Dante's Second Divine Comedy, Purgatorio 17, lines 70 to 72, written in both Italian and English, consistent with Henry Wadsworth Longfellow's 1867 translation. The translation reads, and I quote, Already over us we're still uplifted, the latest sunbeams which the night pursues, that upon many sides the stars appeared, end quote. These lines capture a crucial threshold in Dante's journey. Dante witnesses the consequences of wrath through vivid visions, then receives absolution. The mark is removed from his forehead. As night falls and stars emerge, Virgil reveals the deeper truth. All sin is a distortion of love, twisted by misdirection, excess, or deficiency. In this threshold moment, darkness becomes illuminated, and the disappearance of earthly light allows spiritual truths to emerge. Strachey, a deeply religious Christian, visualizes this liminal moment through his personifications of night and day.
Clearly a well-rounded, versatile, and creative individual, I will now discuss the condition and physical history of this particular painting and plans for conservation treatment. Overall, the painting is in good condition as it has been displayed in a domestic environment for the majority of its lifetime. The canvas, likely linen due to its appearance and texture, is stretched onto a wooden stretcher that is believed to be original. The reverse of the canvas is primed with white paint, extending all the way to the turnover edge, whereas the priming on the front stops at the edge before the tacking margin. Cusping, or distortions near the edge of the canvas caused by tension from the nails, on the front of the painting correlates to the nails currently in place, suggesting the artist's own priming. This suggests that Strachey bought a commercially primed canvas and then placed it inside out, wishing to construct his own ground layers. An artist's decision to prime their own canvas to use were typically motivated by the fact that commercially primed canvases of the time often consisted of an admixture, mainly containing lead white paint. Strachey potentially sought to use the alternative paint or materials in order to achieve a distinct aesthetic effect. While not entirely uncommon, this observation prompted me and my colleague to search for further evidence that would suggest Strachey was experimenting with his methods and/or working out his ideas, suggesting this piece was a preliminary study or cartoon for a larger piece of work, such as a mural. Furthermore, the canvas does not conform to standard dimensions sold by artist colormen in Britain at this time. The colorman near Stowey Mead, Somerset, where Strachey lived, does not appear to have been operating much longer after 1865. So perhaps while visiting London, Strachey purchased a large canvas roll where he would then elect to use the pre-primed side of the canvas or his own ground layers and priming. Overall, it is important to investigate and explore an artist's choice of canvas and preparatory layers, as it can reveal decisions regarding their painting technique and practice. Raking light images indicate the painting is slack and in some areas rests against the stretcher bar, highlighted in green. The canvas has become detached from the stretcher along the upper left edge, highlighted in orange, with red-brown staining visible on the canvas along the circumference of the nail holes, suggesting corrosion from the nails caused the canvas separation. Ultraviolet, or UV fluorescence, is a non-destructive technique that uses radiation and is useful in examining the surface condition of works, such as if there is a surface coating, like a varnish. It can also detect localized areas of grease paint, as these areas will fluoresce differently than that of the original paint. The matte appearance of the paint surface does not initially suggest that varnish is present, but UV image suggests there is some sort of surface coating, evidenced by the fluorescent brush strokes that do not correlate with the paint surface, and the fluorescent drips of the coating material, emphasized by the orange boxes. Further technical analysis will aid in identifying this material. There are a few non-fluorescent or dark spots, as you can see highlighted in red, in localized areas, such as in the wings in the figure of day, above the moon or halo in the figure of night, and in the bottom center of the composition. This could suggest a previous retouching campaign, but it is also possible it is a later modification by the artist, using a material that fluoresces differently to the rest of the work, or applied over a fluorescent coating, like a varnish. If the artist was continuing to work out the color and composition, it is possible it is this later hypothesis. So, with all that being said, in conjunction with Toby's research, I will be performing technical analysis in order to explore Strachey's materials and techniques and further surmise our overarching questions and hypotheses. I will also compare my findings to other analyzed work of Henry Strachey's, such as the Stowe murals, to hopefully gain a deeper understanding into the workings of the artist. This will consist of examining any underdrawing and pentimenti, which are changes made by the artist to the composition, the layer structure and pigments employed, the choice of the medium, surface coatings used, and distinguishing between overpaint or artist-applied changes. Some of the analytical techniques that I will use and that we have available to us at the Courtauld include infrared reflectography, microscopy, or looking at the painting or samples under a microscope, X-ray fluorescence, scanning electron microscopy with energy dispersive X-radiography, and Fourier transform infrared spectroscopy. In concurrence to the technical examination, I'll be treating the painting in order to improve its structural stability and overall visual presentation. This includes temporary structural support to re-adhere the top left edge of the canvas to the tacking margin, surface cleaning the front and back through the use of dry cleaning methods and/or aqueous cleaning methods. And while it may seem straightforward to remove imbibed dust and dirt from a paint surface, conservators are guided by ethical principles, such as making decisions that are informed and governed by an understanding of the artwork and, as much as we can ascertain, artistic intent. I believe the painting was intended to appear quite matte, almost like a fresco, based off of his influences in previous work. So it's important that the cleaning method used does not change the gloss, color, and saturation of the overall image. However, the results of my technical analysis will give evidence to this hypothesis so I can make an informed decision on my treatment. Additionally, I'll likely be performing consolidation of the paint layers. The paint in Night Pursuing Day appears to consist of multiple underbound layers, meaning the ratio of pigment exceeds that of the binding medium. This was often deliberately done to create a matte surface effect, but can at times result in friable and mechanically vulnerable paint. As such, the same considerations applied for surface cleaning will be applied here. If the paint is found to be at risk for flaking, the consolidant selected must not alter the gloss, color, or saturation of the overall image. I will also be performing a small tearment of a pinpoint size hole, as you can see in that bottom image, structural work of the canvas to improve planarity and tension, and, as applicable, retouching any disfiguring losses.
So to conclude, our research questions are the following. Number 1, how did Duncan Grant influence Strachey's artistic practice and what evidence exists of their artistic exchange? 2, was Night Pursuing Day a preparatory or experimental work for a future mural? And 3, we'll be investigating the artist's materials and techniques. And our next steps, we'll be meeting with the biographer of Henry Strachey, looking at family archives, letters, and exchanges. We'll be visiting the Stowe murals in Somerset, as we've already visited the Brockwell Park murals. And then we'll be also conducting some more technical analysis. Thank you, guys.
Just a really quick question, which is, have you checked whether he's in the Robeson archive? His mail order for materials could be the answer.
I did check. I took a fun day trip to Cambridge to go visit it, and unfortunately, he's not in there. I was really hoping he would be, but he's not.
About whether you intimated there was comparable technical analysis of another work by him.
Yes.
So how could that help you to inform whether reworkings were done? Could that not be very helpful there?
Yeah. I think I was initially, comparing the techniques that he did for the murals, and then as well by looking under the microscope and everything, and hopefully seeing all the different layer structures will help me, and then as well the IR, if it'll see if there's been any changes. Sorry, that doesn't fully answer your question.
If you had technical analysis, if that was available to you,
Yeah.
maybe I've misunderstood.
No, you're correct.
The other
Yeah.
paintings have been examined, then you might have much stronger evidence for his practice of reworking or whether it's later restoration.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. He, in those murals, he did use a lot of pencil for his underdrawing, but I didn't so far see in that technical report any strong evidence of lots of reworking. So that's what, again, made us then deduce that this could be a bit more experimental because there has been some evidence of reworking.
Hi, you say it's a really unusual example of an allegorical painting by Strachey. I'm just wondering what you think, why you think it exists. Whether could this be a study or an idea for a mural painting? And you also described the murals being on canvas. I know you haven't seen the stone ones yet, but they're not on stretchers. That's what I understood from what you said. They're not. This couldn't be simply something that was going to be inset into a building.
So the block wall murals are on canvas and then on a stretcher plasterboard. The first two murals in Stowe are canvas directly to the wall, and then interestingly, the third one is canvas on plasterboard inset into the wall.
So none of them are like this.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that exists that in the way of painted studies for murals, or?
I think as well looking in the archive will help us really determine, because I do think he has been known to do studies for then his larger compositions, and so that I think will really help guide more of our research questions.
You say that it's sort of a distinct separation from his usual works, and I wonder if comparison with his other paintings, I don't know what those paintings are, and I wonder if you could maybe speak more to what his usual oeuvre was. And question of how the palette changes between those two. I know there may not be technical analysis done on them, but sort of close analysis of how his method changes between allegorical works and his other works. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so I think we still have quite a bit of research to do in terms of looking at his works. We showed, so this is one of his works that he did that we got access to. And then obviously the murals. But I think we still have quite a lot to do in terms of finding other works by him, and that will allow us to do sort of the comparative work. Yeah, unfortunately, there's not much work that we have access to right now at this moment, so we're hoping as we do more research, we'll be able to gain access to those.
And as a quick added aside, I think it is interesting as well to explore the context. Like this work was painted in 1918, so that year the First War ended, whereas these church murals were at the beginning of the war. So as well, was it kind of an artistic expression, as being a deeply religious Christian man was an expression as well. He uses Dante to talk about how love can be misguided and then it turns to sin. So it was an artistic expression of that, or something more as well that he was looking into, more like the symbolism movement, and that was prevalent at this time as well.
Yeah, and I wonder if his materials were impacted by the war in any way, if sort of restrictions on what materials were available might have impacted.
No, it's a good point. So far from what I've read, it's more after the Second War. I know zinc was not really prevalent, and then that kind of helped the movement of titanium white become into play, but I have been intrigued by that as well, to see if there's a lack of materials that made particular decisions of his.
You said the work came from a domestic location, so in that period, would there not have been 10 million cigarettes smoked over it? You have to take those sorts of environmental. That was one point. The other point was, is it signed on the back?
Signed on the front.
It's signed on the front.
Left corner.
The fact that there's a quote on the back, does that not indicate that it was more of a work rather than a study?
I was thinking that as well, and I think we're going to meet with the biographer of Henry Strachey, and she's going to bring letters, so we'll compare the handwriting just to ensure that we think it really is his handwriting, because again, it could have been added later. But that was something I did, consider as well, which is a good point.
But I think because of the matte-ness of it and his work, he's a muralist primarily, we're still kind of trying to figure that out.
But it's quite big as a painting.
Yeah, yeah,
Over 4 foot by,
yeah.
yeah, so it's quite big of a thing.
Yeah, quite big study potentially. That's what I think. Yeah.
I was interested to see that you'd actually linked it to a specific translation of Dante. So that was from 1867.
Yes.
And I was interested in linking to that because of Henry Strachey's uncle being the Renaissance historian John Addington Symonds, who amongst his whole history of the Renaissance also produced several specific books on Dante. And maybe there might be interesting to see the correlation between that translation and Symonds's work on Dante.
Okay, no, that's good. Yeah, thank you. We'll investigate that for sure. Great, thank you guys.
So we have been researching this oil painting on plywood, a tribute to Paul Nash, and dated in the early interwar period. Upon receiving the painting from its private owner, we were also provided with the possible title of Wood Interior, a 1919 Nash painting, the location of which has been unknown since its display in a 1928 London group exhibition. While the possibility of this being the missing painting is a question central to our research, as this is the title we have been provided, it will be referred to as such throughout. We will now introduce the painting and its condition before discussing the main questions this has presented so far.
The painting depicts a landscape organised around an angular river that cuts through the composition. This river establishes a clear divide on the riverbank, reinforcing a sense of spatial recession and separation. The treatment of subject matter align closely with modernist aesthetics and Nash's established stylistic language. The reverse of the painting raises additional questions central to this study. It presents a swiftly executed, largely uniform surface painted with broad, wide brushstrokes. The reverse will therefore serve as a secondary site of investigation with the potential to complicate or enrich our understanding of the painting's history and Nash's working practices.
So the painting is in generally good condition. There are some areas of cracking and paint loss around the edges of the board and discoloured surface deposits across the front. The horizontal cracking runs in line with the grain of the top ply layer, seemingly relating to stresses within the grain at the right edge may relate to the board's construction. There is original paint in most of these losses, indicating their presence before painting. There are, however, a couple of visible areas of filling and retouching of losses in the top ply layer. This can be seen on the right, where the texture, gloss, and colour of retouching shows some disparity to the surrounding original paint. The appearance of dirt across the surface is varied, from spore-like patterns which seem to correlate with specific paint passages to drip and scuff marks. The back of the board is in structurally better condition, with very few losses around the edges and minimal cracking of the white overpaint. Beyond this, there is little we can determine about the condition of the concealed painting at this stage. Like the painting, the wooden frame also exhibits numerous surface deposits and dirt layers and areas of paint loss where it has been chipped or scuffed. Based on these observations, proposed treatment would begin with consolidation of vulnerable flaking paint before surface cleaning. This will require testing of paint passages to determine any localized sensitivities. The previous interventions appear visually distracting, so the painting would benefit from their removal and replacement or reintegration. Finally, the frame also requires attention, cleaning, consolidating, and re-adhering two of the disjoint members.
We have compiled a list of key questions relating to the material, state, and attribution of the work, which we aim to address through our research. Because the painting is thought to be wood interior in Andrew Causey's Paul Nash catalogue, but there is no accompanying illustration, our focus will be to assess whether it can be plausibly attributed to Nash. This question may be approached through three interrelated considerations: authorship, date, and location. Evaluating the attribution requires situating it within Nash's practice before and after the proposed date of 1919. Questions of date can be explored through stylistic analysis as well as through technical examination of materials. Location offers a further complementary line of inquiry. If the work is indeed by Nash, identifying where it was produced may assist in confirming its date, particularly given the extensive records and archival material that document its movements. These three factors are best understood not as separate questions, but as mutually informative and, in many respects, interchangeable.
Of particular interest is the whited out painting on the reverse. In our question of trying to make out the composition beneath, technical imaging techniques will hopefully prove insightful. This previous use of the board support has also spurred our interest into the physical history of the support, looking for clues as to additional previous functions. Finally, with the framing aligning stylistically with the painting, this too could provide
to the painting's history.
Paul Nash was born in London in 1889 and died in 1946. His career is often framed in two parts, his status as an official war artist and his later engagement with surrealism. By contrast, the year 1919 has received relatively limited attention within existing scholarship and is frequently characterized as a transitional moment between these two modes. For this reason, an assessment of wood interior requires consideration not only of the specific moment, but also of Nash's artistic development on either side of it. His early artistic training began in black and white design, producing bookplates influenced by the arts and crafts movement. His transfer to the Slade School of Art in 1910 marked a gradual move away from this controlled mode of working. By 1911, his interest had shifted decisively towards landscape, and by the time he left the Slade in 1913, he was increasingly engaging with contemporary avant-garde developments. This trajectory, however, was abruptly interrupted by the outbreak of the First World War. Sent to the Western Front in early 1917, Nash began producing watercolours of the surrounding landscape in what can be described as the role of a soldier artist. An injury later that year brought him back to Britain, where he exhibited his watercolours, which helped his promotion to official war artist. The scale of destruction upon his return transformed his outlook, prompting the beginning of a shift towards oil painting, which he felt better suited to conveying the gravity of the subject matter. The close association between his rapid artistic development and the war created a difficulty once the conflict ended, leaving Nash, in effect, a war artist without a war. Although the British War Memorials Committee, established in 1918, initially offered a pathway forward, its activities were curtailed within the same year. At the same time, public interest in war art diminished, shaped by a broader cultural desire to move beyond the trauma of the conflict. 1919 emerges as a particularly complex and unstable moment in his career, marked by extensive travel, sustained experimentation, and a search for a new artistic direction in the aftermath of war. While his brother John had undergone formal training in oil painting, Paul did not, and the post-war period became a time of technical development, including a period in which the brothers shared a studio. This could offer useful insights in the technical analysis of the painting. Attention will therefore be given to his evolving use of oil paint in the years surrounding 1919. More broadly, Nash's continued experimentation with materials and subject matter. In the mid-1920s, he shifted towards still life, where his handling became more fluid, before developing further in the latter part of the decade. By 1928, his work was increasingly shaped by surrealism, marking another significant stylistic transition. Understanding 1919 to be a year of evolution and experimentation complicates attempts at identifying an overall style. However, discovering the location of where the work may have been produced and what it depicts presents an opportunity to situate it more securely within Nash's broader artistic development. Nash's letters, held in the Tate archive, detail location and dates, which allows his movements to be traced with a reasonable degree of accuracy. This is particularly valuable for this year, during which he had travelled extensively. These letters could therefore provide a range of potential locations, but also valuable insight into his working methods and patterns of movement during this period. A second approach moves beyond biographical evidence to consider comparative visual analysis. Preliminary research has highlighted the watercolour The Backwater, completed in the same year, as a potentially useful point of comparison. Work has a compositional similarity that, although viewed from a different angle, could suggest a common setting. Therefore, further research will be undertaken into his broader body of work in 1919, as well as the Tate archives, to substantiate and develop this line of inquiry.
So from a technical analysis standpoint, we can look for consistencies between this work and Nash's other in the materials and techniques employed. To begin with paint application, you can see that there is a lack of layering. In most cases, the passages of block colour are separated by exposed ground, preparatory layer. While when looking closely at his works displayed at the Tate and Imperial War Museum, this does appear common. Excuse the lighting, but this detail from the mule track dated 1918 shows this quite clearly, with the black and green sections separated by a thin passage of exposed ground. While not unique to Nash, it does show some consistency in technique. We can also look at the materials in the painting to see if they align with the period and Nash's works, and his preferences detailed in archival correspondence. The next stages in analysing the ground and paint layers will involve microscopic and elemental analysis. A primary aim in this is pigment identification. These findings can be compared to an artist's wider body of work and other paintings from the same period. In some cases, the identification of a pigment not yet commercially available at the same date of the painting can be telling of misdating or later additions. A non-invasive technique to begin with is X-ray fluorescence, or XRF. With this, we are able to identify the elements present in particular areas of the painting. This offers a great starting point for determining possible corresponding pigments and highlighting anything unusual. This technique is limited in its inability to distinguish between different paint layers, and we are unable to determine whether the elements detected definitively come from a pigment or could be an additive. A particularly important consideration when industrially produced tube paints came into use in the mid-19th century. To analyse specific layers of the painting, we take cross-sectional analysis can be performed of specific layers or pigment particles. Based on the results of preliminary XRF analysis, an element of interest identified in a few areas of the composition is titanium. Titanium is commonly associated with the pigment titanium white, though there are other associated pigments, and it has also been found in paints as additives or contaminants. Titanium white pigment was first produced in 1918 in Norway, before becoming available as an artist's oil paint in 1920 in the US and no later than 1924 in Europe. The manufacture of the paint changed since the beginning of its production. Early forms of the pigment were in composite form, meaning they were not pure titanium dioxide. They often contained barium sulfate or calcium sulfate. The anatase form was used most widely between the 1920s and 30s, before being largely replaced by the rutile form in the 1940s. If titanium white can be definitively identified, further analysis will include Raman spectroscopy, with hopes to distinguish between anatase and rutile forms, information which could greatly contribute to the dating of this painting.
The choice of support introduces further complexity. Nash did not commonly work on board, instead favouring canvas, which raises additional questions in relation to attribution. While plywood was available to artists in Britain in 1919, it did not become widely used until later decades.
This board is 5-ply, with imperial measurements of 20 by 24 inches in commercial production. The diagonal score marks along two sides of the board likely relate to it being cut down at some point predating the painting. With the reverse concealed, this is all we are able to tell of the board's construction based on physical clues at this time. Further research into plyboard production in this period and how this support choice might relate to Nash will hopefully contribute to our answering of questions surrounding plausible date and attribution.
It is also worth noting that Nash's brother occasionally worked on board, and their shared studio space in 1918 opens up the possibility that the painting in the reverse may not have been executed by Nash himself. This painting comes with another set of questions given the reverse of the panel, though it has since been painted over white paint. Around the very edges you can see evidence of another composition. In addition to this, there are pinhole marks primarily on the reverse in all corners and on the top and bottom edges, which may suggest an additional earlier function of the board. With this, we are presented with the questions of what is the composition, who is the artist, and when was it painted, why and when was it covered, and do the pinholes correspond to anything? It is important to situate the presence of the double-sided work within Nash's broader artistic practice, particularly as this feature complicates questions of attribution. To date, 2 examples of double-sided works by Nash, as shown here, have been identified, one on paper and one on canvas. These examples demonstrate that working on both sides of the support was something Nash did, at least intermittently. More broadly, it would not have been unusual for artists working in the immediate post-war period to use materials frugally, even for war artists who received significant commissions post-war, as evidenced by Nash's diversification of his practice in order to support his family. In this context, the reuse of materials appears entirely plausible. The presence of varnish beneath the white paint layer is notable, as neither brother typically varnished their oil paintings in this period. The majority of varnish layers on their works are understood to be later additions by dealers and collectors. This aligns with contemporary stylistic preferences for flat matte surfaces. The fact that the white paint layer appears to have been applied after the work has been framed raises additional questions regarding its chronology and intent. Was this intervention carried out by a later owner after acquisition during an exhibition or by Nash himself? And what motivation might there have been to obscure what has been a completed work?
To begin with what we are able to tell about the concealed composition so far, as Lucy has pointed out, the painting appears to have been varnished. As you can see in this detail here, with the painting in ultraviolet light, there is a small border of unvarnished paint. The straight line around all edges of the reverse may indicate that the varnish was applied after framing. Interestingly, the depth of the unvarnished area matches the depth of the frame rebate of the painting on the front, around 3 to 5 millimeters, meaning it's possible that the same frame could have been reused. From the paint visible around the edges, we can infer that it is likely a landscape scene beneath, with the lower portion a brownish green and the top a light blue. From a technical analysis standpoint, the first approach to trying to identify a concealed composition is often X-ray photography. The differential absorption of the X-rays by different elements can reveal hidden details or layers. There are limitations to this approach, however, as heavy elements like lead are very absorbent, producing very light areas in the X-ray image that can mask other components. The lead white identified in the front composition and overpaint on the back during preliminary XRF analysis did lead us to expect a level of distortion. Comparing both the visible front composition and the pattern of the white overpaint to the X-ray, there is very little unaccounted for, with only these few lines that do not correspond to each other, possibly a section of horizon. So the next steps in trying to reveal something of this concealed composition would be macro XRF. This essentially creates maps of where elements have been identified in the painting, and if successful, we may be able to piece together details of the composition beneath. Learning more about this white overpaint is also important in developing our understanding of this element of the painting's physical history. Identifying the composition of the paint might help in dating this intervention. As already described, microscopic and elemental analysis will aid in identifying pigments and additives. We can also find out more about the binding medium through staining tests and FTIR, helping us to identify the type of paint. It will be interesting to compare this paint in its constituent parts to the white paint used on the front composition and on the frame. The origin of the frame is unknown, though it is stylistically in keeping with the painting. Not a lot is documented of Nash's framing practices. However, a letter to his dealer, Dudley Tooth, in 1942, specifies his preferences for the frames of Arthur Colley. We intend to look further into Colley's framing practices and the materials of this frame to see if any links can be drawn to other works by Nash, and more immediately to the materials of either painting on this board or the overpainting. A final interesting area of consideration surrounds the sourcing of the board support and what can be inferred of its physical history predating either painting. There are small pinholes around the edge of the board on the reverse that do not correspond to current framing and appear too small to be nail holes. One hypothesis is previous use of the board as a movable support for works on paper. Nash's process is well documented. He was known to complete sketches, drawings, and watercolours on paper outdoors at the scenes he depicted. It is possible that this kind of makeshift drawing support was in the studio, and with lacking money and resources in this period, it could have been reused as a painting support.
A significant question arises when we shift focus beyond the painting itself and the artist's materials, formal techniques, and biographical context. How did it travel from creation to the Painting Pairs project to the Courtauld? Reconstructing its ownership history is not just an exercise in tracing possession, but another means of determining whether the wood interior referenced in the catalogue can be confidently identified as. A logical starting point was to search for references of the work in catalogues of past exhibitions in order to begin constructing a provenance profile. Corsey records wood interior as part of Mrs. Leo Meyer, also known as L.C. Mellon Palmer's collection. Palmer was the daughter of railroad magnate General William J. Palmer, and her husband, the writer Leopold Hamilton Meyer, presents potential links to Nash, particularly through possible overlaps with the London's literary and art circles. Although there is little information regarding the Myers art collection, the Colorado Springs Pioneers Museum holds a substantial archive of correspondence related to the Palmer family. Another promising avenue of research is their daughter, the artist Elsie Queen Meyer, known professionally as E.Q. Nicholson. Any documentation could provide further insight into the movement of works within the family. And significantly, she married Kit Nicholson, the brother of Ben Nicholson, who was a close artist friend of Nash's, offering yet another potential link between artist and collector. While this information provides a valuable foundation, it must be approached with caution. Corsey's book was published in 1980, and Mrs. Leo Meyer, cited as the owner, died in 1955. Corsey notes that the collections listed represent the last known locations of the works at the time of writing, indicating that further research into subsequent collections, donations, and family records is necessary. Importantly, the catalogue offers more than ownership information. The painting is also recorded as having been shown in 2 exhibitions. Held in the Tate Archives, the exhibition catalogues, correspondence, and administrative records for the New England Art Club provides another avenue of research in tracking the history of the painting. Not only to confirm this painting's appearance at the exhibition of 1920 through photographic evidence, but also as a space of potential additional information surrounding the owner of the work at the time. Tate Archives also holds a catalogue for the London Group retrospective exhibition with essays and prices of the objects. By comparing the information between the 2 exhibitions, the potential to discover when the work was acquired and any more information on the painting and its reverse could prove useful. This presentation has outlined our main questions that guide our investigation into wood interior. While definitive answers are yet to be reached, the analysis so far provides a foundation for future research. By integrating material study, archival research, and comparative analysis, we aim to clarify date, authorship, and physical life, to ask whether our painting is Wood Interior by Paul Nash.
Thank you very much. Does that Yeah, I should have put that in, but I did already do that, and we didn't get any results from that. Yes.
Okay, so your X-ray, although you say it didn't tell you what the underlying reaction was, it is fantastic for the brushstrokes. And so the detail you showed at the side there, you can see very clearly the kind of brushstrokes. So I was wondering if you're considering using that kind of comparative evidence of the use of brushwork to attribute the work to Nash.
Yes, that would be a really interesting avenue of investigation. I think we've hit a couple of not sticking points, but because there hasn't actually been very much technical analysis done on Nash paintings, none that we know of. Things like that could come in really useful, where it's more visual and less based on elemental analysis. Yeah. Yes.
Thank you. I have lots of questions, but just one small thing. You mentioned that Nash doesn't work on board much, and I just wanted to make the point that John Nash did work on board quite a lot, and actually I looked at this painting when it came up at auction, and a lot of John Nash's paintings are on boards the exact same dimensions as this one.
Yeah.
Obviously they were sharing a studio and possibly
Yeah,
materials,
yeah.
but I just wondered if you were considering the possibility
Yes,
that it
definitely
might actually
considering that, because as they were working in the studio at the same time, that they could have been sharing materials. So that has given us sort of another artist sort of in and of himself to look into as well.
But I think we were also looking at just John Nash's style of oil painting. It is very different from this particular piece, from what I've seen anyway so far.
I'm intrigued by the overpainted reverse, as I know you are. Are you doing traditional sort of sampling of the back?
Done some tradition, cross-section sampling. So we do need to look at the layer structure to see, basically try and do a bit more analysis, and hopefully if we're able to do some elemental analysis on the that white paint as well, we might be able to find out a bit more about it. And again, we thought it would be good to compare it not only to the painting on the front, but the frame, because we're not sure if there could be some similarities there.
And also raking light, I was thinking on the back. You might be, because you can't get it through X-ray.
Yeah.
If you've seen it in raking light, maybe you'll see something.
Yeah.
But I know you might have done
The white overpaint is thick and very textured, so that's sort of what you get to see in the raking light images.
We're digitally removing that with the cross-referring to the X-ray. So
Yes. So we've done a lot of very close looking at the X-ray, because we then have to compare it to the front image and the white paint brush strokes. So it's trying to find anything in there that doesn't quite correspond to either. Yes.
On the reverse with the holes that you found, and it seemed to be like a paper support when you did artwork. Did you find a buildup of paint within those holes, like you painted over them?
No, not necessarily, but more so because of where they are. So the composition on the back of the painting doesn't extend all the way to the edges, and those holes are really quite close to the edges. So I think that's more just because you didn't get there. Okay, perfect. Yes, thank you very much.
I just wanted to thank everyone for coming. I'm sure you'll agree that they've already done a phenomenal amount of work. They've only received these paintings 9 weeks ago, so it's a great body of work to begin, and lots of questions and lots to do. So we want to wish them success. And I wanted to say that the final presentations are going to be on Thursday, the 4th of June in the afternoon, and followed by a drinks reception. So we hope you all come back and find out the answers to all these questions. Don't give them another round of hugs.